Really happy to have Whitney here today from the Washington Post, and Dave Nolan is going to be doing the Q&A with her, so hopefully you have some good questions. And she's here as part of the MPPA workshop that's been going on all week. Great stuff. Tomorrow is probably the last day of full panels, right?
We're pretty much finished with full panels.
Okay.
Students are out shooting big stories today, tomorrow.
So anyways, I'll turn it over to Dave and Whitney.
All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here today. Appreciate this. This is unusual for me. I don't do this, so this is kind of fun.
I don't either.
You either? All right,
No.
Great. Well, we're going to have fun today then. Whitney Shefte is our guest today. Whitney is a multimedia journalist at the Washington Post. She's also the president or future president of the White House News Photographers Association, and she's also WAPOW, which is the Women Photojournalism Washington, and a member of that organization. So Whitney mentors women and other photographers, not just women, in Washington, D.C. and surrounding areas, and helping them with their careers, which is phenomenal, I think. That's fantastic. Whitney is a multiple award-winning journalist and photojournalist, and she travels all over the world covering stories for the Washington Post. She does long-form journalism, so a little bit different than television that you see on the nightly newscast, little shorter pieces and things like that. So I'm not going to talk too much here. So Whitney, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself beyond that and kind of what you do day to day at the Washington Post.
Sure. So day to day kind of varies a lot. Often I'm working on these long-term projects, so I have maybe 2 weeks to 3 months to even a year sometimes to work on projects. And I'm often juggling a lot of projects, but one day I may be preparing for an interview, so I'm doing some research and I'm looking up Census Bureau data, and I'm trying to find subjects on Nexus. I know sort of roughly who I'm looking for or the type of person I'm looking for, and so I'm making phone calls and trying to figure all of that out. And the next day I may go out on a shoot, or I may be on an airplane. I may be interviewing, I may be shooting B-roll, I may be doing a lot of waiting. There's a whole lot of that. And then I come back and I edit a piece. So, that can take a little bit of time or a lot of time, depending on the story. And that's kind of how it works.
Great. So you went to the Washington Post as an intern.
Yes.
Which is great. And then they offered you a job after your internship to stay on, which is even more phenomenal. What led to that kind of process? What did you do to prepare for that internship? And what did you do to stay on as far as getting hired on at the Washington Post?
Yeah, so when I was brought on as an intern, it was during this time when we were all making audio slideshows. So we would put sound and pictures together, and we'd use this application called Sound Slides, and that was sort of the hot new thing in web journalism. And so, because I had this skill, this audio editing skill, and knew how to paste with pictures and that kind of thing, they were just blown away that I knew how to do this. This was not something that people in the profession were even doing yet. So during my internship, I did some of these stories, and I actually stayed on. So I did a summer internship, and I decided I had one more semester of college I had to go back for. I was a senior, but needed to do a little more time. And I decided to stay through the fall, and I went back in the spring. So I interned straight through the end of the year, and then I came back almost every weekend, every other weekend sometimes. So I did Tuesday, Thursday classes so that I could work Fridays and Mondays. And the reason I wanted to do that was I knew that I wanted to be hired, and I didn't want to leave. I didn't want them to forget about me and bring in some other intern who they liked more. So I stuck around until they gave me a job. And yeah, it worked out. I started getting officially paid 2 days after graduation.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now you talked about using SoundSlide was kind of that gateway for you to get into the newsroom. Kind of back then. How many of you know what SoundSlides are? Yeah, okay, was. It's not being supported anymore, but back in the early 2000s, that was kind of the thing. It was an easy program that allowed you to put photographs and audio together and put it up on the web very quickly. It's no longer supported. So technology changes fast, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
How's it changing in the Washington Post newsroom today? What are you doing that's different now today that you were doing maybe just a year or two ago?
Yeah, I mean, a year or two ago, I don't know that we're doing too much different in that amount of time, but you know, the software that we use certainly changes. I'm the last person on the planet still using Final Cut 7, just because my computer still has it and I refuse to switch. Once that computer dies, they're going to make me change over. Everyone else uses 10, which I don't want to use. So I have to figure out how to convince them to buy me Premiere whenever that happens. But you know, we're trying new things like virtual reality. We have this guy doing things with that. I don't know what that means exactly, but
Like the Oculus Rift or something like that?
yeah, I think we got one of those maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're experimenting?
Yeah, we're experimenting. We're trying out things like using Snapchat to tell stories. So lots of new platforms. We're trying to figure out are there places we can put our long form video on, you know, other places on the web besides our website. You know, things can't be so insular that they just stay on the Washington Post, because that's not how people are consuming news anymore, stories. So we're sort of changing constantly in that way. We're changing the types of cameras that we're using. People are talking about switching to the Canon, I always forget the name of it, it'll come back to me.
5D Mark III?
No, we use 5D Mark IIIs now.
The C100?
C100s. Everyone wants
Okay.
to switch to the C100s.
Which just went down in cost to like $2,000.
Yeah, it's a good deal compared to what it was, I guess. So stuff like that is changing for sure. I mean, when I started shooting video, which was maybe a year into working at the Post, we were using mini DV tape cameras, and we had to capture everything on the computer afterwards in real time. So it was a very long process dealing with these tapes. So things change all the time.
So what kind of digital skills do you find most valuable to your job today?
Digital skills, I mean, certainly knowing how to edit efficiently is huge. And then understanding how to use social media to promote work is important. I wish I knew HTML5 and, you know, how to code and design and all that, and there are lots of jobs in that area. People are doing amazing things, and I think that's sort of propelling what's happening with web storytelling. But yeah, I guess those are the main things.
And you guys have a web team that actually codes your content and creates the stories for your website.
Yeah, we have a lot of people doing that stuff. We have designers, programmers, developers. We're really lucky at the Post that we have all of these resources, and you know, people making new apps. Like there's this new Kindle Fire app called Rainbow that apparently is great. I don't have a Kindle, but you know, doing more with the iPad app and that kind of thing. There are teams of people doing that stuff.
So what do you think is the future of digital devices, applications in the newsroom? I mean, you mentioned earlier today Meerkat as a device, as a tool, an app that you guys might be using. Twitter just came out with Periscope, another tool that might be valuable for what you guys do in the newsroom. What kind of applications do you think are valuable right now to what you do?
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that, where the whole live video thing, it's becoming so easy to just be somewhere and the whole world can see what's happening, and you don't have to have a bunch of expensive gear to do that, and that's pretty amazing. I mean, I think there are other social implications to all that I could talk to people for a long time about offline that scare me a little bit. But in terms of storytelling, we have a lot of opportunity to do more quickly and easily and cheaply, and there's going to be more of that. I think, you know, we know that people are consuming video in a really different way now. They're not watching TV every night like they used to, and you know, for us, they're not coming to the Washington Post for video first. We know that too, because it still is a newspaper website. So we're also figuring out how we can put things on different platforms in different places. And that's going to be really important for our future. I think that's going to continue to evolve constantly. So.
Which applications or other programs do you use that you feel are the most valuable to you in your day-to-day kind of work in the newsroom? Or even in the field while you're out shooting? What do you use to communicate? What do you use to edit video if you're out in the field? Are you bringing a laptop? Are you editing on your cell phone? What kind of things do you use?
Yeah, well, because I'm not doing a whole lot of news per se, I'm doing more long-term projects, I don't have to edit in the field usually. Sometimes I have to do that stuff, and I will bring a laptop and maybe edit from the car with like a phone hotspot. My phone allows the internet to be plugged in to my computer. And then, I'm using Instagram and Vimeo and Twitter and all of that, but I'm probably more old school than I should be with those things.
Do you use social media in a way to talk about your process to your audience at all, or is it more just as a tool to explain the stories that you're telling?
Yeah, I'm mostly using it as a promotion tool. I probably should talk about process more because mostly journalists follow me, so they probably are the people who care about that. But yeah, mostly as a promotion tool. And then to sort of show other things that I'm seeing that I think are interesting. That's the main thing.
Now, things change fast in this business, not just in the news business, but in generally around us constantly with a new technology that's coming out. If you were to design something like an application for your job today, what would it be? What kind of tool are you looking for that you would find the most useful in your day-to-day work as a journalist?
That's a hard question.
I hope so. I like hard questions.
I think I love using motion graphics in my pieces, and I took an After Effects continuing education class a few years ago, and it's really hard. So something that could do that sort of thing for me would be cool. Although, I work with amazing people who do that work, so I also like I like working with them, so I wouldn't want to take that away. But having that be accessible. I think now that we have things like WordPress, we can lay out stories really easily, but maybe there could be even better tools for that, for embedding the video and having it play right there, and placing things in different parts of the pages. And then I would love to see like an Apple TV app for the work that we do, so that people can be at home and consume this content as more of a captive audience than we're sort of allowing them or seeing with our website itself.
Right. Okay. So, and I asked that question because this class is about entrepreneurship, and that's kind of the audience that you're speaking. Mm-hmm. So they're looking, I'm assuming, at ways of making tools that are going to make the jobs of journalists, advertisers, public relations professionals, broadcasters, easier. And something like along the lines that you were talking about, an application that would do graphic design on the fly, that would be simple and easy to use, would be pretty valuable to somebody like you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
Also, if you like to make things, I would love for a better audio system, because that's actually the hardest part of my job. Because audio is super important with video storytelling. It's probably more important than the video itself. And with the 5D Mark IIIs, you're recording audio separately. So you're monitoring all this stuff, and when you're working on your own, that becomes really difficult because your brain is just all over the place. And that's one of the reasons why people are switching to the C100s. Is you can record the audio in camera, but then that takes away the ability to take these amazing still photos. So I'd love a system that allows me to do all of that. So.
Well, there is one, right? Isn't the iPhone being touted as the new device that will change the world and make everybody a storyteller? How do you see that?
Yeah, I think the iPhone's great. I don't think that it has the ability at this point to give us just amazing, beautiful images. I haven't found an application that's good enough that allows me enough control. But if it gets there, awesome. I think that whatever tools we can use, that's great. And if we can make it easier and cheaper for people to tell stories, we should do that. And the most important thing is the story and the ability to tell the story well and to communicate a message to people and to get people to care about a person or a topic. And the tool that you're using to do that, it doesn't matter to me. There are a lot of old school professionals who are afraid that the average user is going to take over the industry and their jobs are going to go away. But I think that storytelling is important enough that it requires high level skill set, and I don't think that's going to go away.
Yeah, that's great. So, would you like to ask some questions now? Let's open it up to the audience. Is that about the time? Okay.
Yeah, we got a mic here if anybody wants to ask anything. I got a quick question just about the kind of business side of things. You mentioned before in the class I taught earlier about Jeff Bezos' role and kind of, since he's a tech entrepreneur that now owns the Washington Post, is there any of that influence kind of that trickled down throughout the...
Yeah, so Jeff Bezos has given us a lot of money. That's the most important part. But then he gave us this money and then he said, oops, you guys spent twice what I gave you, so maybe we need to slow down a little bit. But that infusion has helped, and a lot of that is going towards some of the technology stuff. So this Rainbow Kindle app, that was totally, I think, a Bezos thing. He let us hire a bunch of people to work on that, and he's all about these bundles. He wants stories to come in bundles, and I think that means that maybe you're getting a subscription to the website and you're getting the iPad, and maybe you're getting a video subscription, or you're getting things in groups, so it's not just like totally a la carte. But beyond that, he doesn't, that I know of, doesn't have a ton of day-to-day influence. It's more of like an overseeing influence. One other thing that I am seeing though is they're hiring a lot of like blogger types, clickbait. They want to be more like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post because they know that drives traffic. And I have mixed feelings about that. I mean, I think that the strong journalism, in-depth storytelling, that can't go away. That would diminish our brand, and it would be really sad for journalism if we stopped doing that, and it would be really bad for democracy. But if we do some of that and it helps pay the bills, cool. As long as I don't have to do it. Cool.
Got to reach the bottom line. Any questions? I personally use Snapchat to send garden pictures to my friends and vice versa. So I haven't really played with the Washington Post Snapchat thing. I think they're just really short video stories, but I don't really get Snapchat. I don't know. I follow them on the Washington Post after South by.
Maybe you can tell us about.
But they focus on like kind of what they're doing. The reporters on the street just like, we're at the museum today, or just kind of updating what's happening as they happen. So yeah, it's kind of cool.
Hi. What was your most difficult story emotionally and work-wise? Like the one you did but you didn't feel you were connected to? And then what was your most difficult emotional story to tell, and why?
Stories I haven't felt connected to, I don't know, sometimes there's like short, sort of silly things I feel like I have to do, like shooting a 3D printer, make a gun, and it's just making a time lapse for a day. And I don't really necessarily identify with the guy who wants to make the 3D printed gun, so that's part of it, I guess. But emotionally difficult stories that's like all I do, really. So, I did a big project last year about two brothers who were killed in combat and their surviving brother, who is also active duty and is still a Marine. And that's really tough to hear a family story about that. Another tough story that I did was, this was several years ago, about HIV/AIDS spending in DC. It was this big project, and I decided to focus on a hospice in DC that takes homeless HIV/AIDS patients. And so I followed one woman. I often find that finding a character and following that character and telling the story that way is the best way to do it, and you're able to show people a larger issue through that individual, and the viewer cares about that person, and so therefore they care about the issue. And so I followed this woman through, and I published the story, and a couple of months later she died, and that was really tough. Same thing with a cancer story that I did. This guy who was only 32, he developed this super rare cancer, and I spent months with him, and even though there were professional boundaries, I felt like he was my friend in a lot of ways by the end of it. And it was hard because I'm the same age roughly, and when someone like that dies such an untimely death, you can't not be affected by it. So there have been some tough ones, for sure.
When you're out doing a story, is it just you yourself, or is it a small crew of people?
So it's almost always just me. Occasionally a writer may be with me. Often about half of my work is assigned and the other half I pitch. The stuff that's assigned, if a writer and I go together, I typically conduct the interviews totally separately because I like to create an intimate environment. But yeah, I'm shooting everything by myself. So you just have like a small light kit with you? No, so I have a big softbox kit, and it packs up pretty well. And I also have a small LED that I could put on a monopod. But yeah, most places I go, I have a rental car, so I'm able to leave the big light in the car when I don't need it.
What is the role of analytics or data? Like, how do you or the organization sort of assess the role of video, and how do you see that going into the future?
Yeah, so we use Omniture to track our page views, and we can see how long people stay with a story or with a video. So we're looking at views, but also engagement. And it's super important because it's telling us how people are getting to the story, how long they're staying there, how many of them there are. And I think we have to. You have to look at that in a holistic way. You can't just say, well, this story got 10,000 views and that's not enough, or whatever number, pick a number. But you kind of have to think about, like, did we promote this properly? Did we put this on social media? Did we think about whether this is the best platform for that piece of content? So we actually have a team that does that. That's their job to sort of deal with that stuff. And that's not going to go away. I also think that we have to balance all that with, we do still have an obligation to tell important stories no matter what. And sometimes those stories may not be the things that people care about most. I mean, if we're just looking at numbers and even engagement for that matter, and that's all we care about, then we can just do like panda stories and, I don't know, who's the latest Britney Spears, that kind of thing. But, we have an obligation to do more than that. So it's looking at both.
And how much do you pay attention to analytics?
I don't pay attention at all. I should. I mean, I do get a daily report, so I kind of look to see what's the most viewed thing for the day. And sometimes with my stories, I'll check, but sometimes I don't. It's not my job directly to know that stuff. I think they're going to change that soon. We're going to have to start paying more attention to that on an individual basis. They're giving us more access to the system. It used to be that you had to go through your manager to get that information, and it wasn't super readily available, but it will be soon.
Do you think there's room for growth, I guess, in terms of, the Washington Post is a large organization, but they can only cover so many stories, room for entrepreneurial video houses and, kind of thinking of maybe people want to start their own video, subscription or, on YouTube or something, a channel on YouTube or something. Can you talk a little bit about just kind of stories that could be told just around us and around
Yeah. I mean, I think we're seeing really cool things coming from production companies, and we don't necessarily, like, the Post itself doesn't necessarily like buy a lot of that stuff, but sometimes we do. We certainly hire freelancers sometimes. The New York Times probably does a better job of this, like their op docs. Most of that stuff is out of house. They're bringing that in, hiring those folks, paying them after the fact, whatever it may be. So there's definitely room for that. I think what we're seeing with a lot of production companies is they're mixing journalism with commercial work. So they may do an ad for Subaru or something, but then they get to do some really great story that they sell to a news organization as well. So I think that's a good way that people are balancing it and still getting paid, paid well enough.
Hello. For someone who is aspiring to land a job as a video journalist, what advice can you give to help maybe in a demo reel? What is it looking for, or an application, or just any advice you can give on landing that job?
Yeah, totally. So it's definitely all about the portfolio first. I hire our VJ interns, for example, and what I look for is that you have at least a couple of really strong stories, probably character-driven stories, short doc style. We don't choose broadcast style pieces or applicants. That doesn't mean that there aren't spaces for people who do that kind of work, but what my team does is very doc style for sure. And then I look for, do you have some news under your belt? Do you have, sports isn't totally required, but just sort of like genre variety is what we're looking for, and a handful of stories within that. So, most people just send me like a Vimeo channel, and that's fine. I don't really care what platform it's on, as long as I can access the stories easily. And if it's going to be hard for me to make your stories play, then I'm probably not going to watch them. So that, making it easy is really important. We don't accept stuff through the mail. It's all digital, so you have to know at least how to put it online. And that's really it. I mean, beyond that, I'd say, network, go to professional events, join your local NPPA, your local whatever. And that's where you're going to meet professionals, and then get as many internships as you can, and that's how you get your foot in the door. That's how I was hired. That's how I think 2 of our other video journalists right now. That's how they got the job. They were hired right after their internship. So that's often what we're seeing, especially now that in this industry. Sadly, they're paying less, so they want to hire people right out of school. That isn't great in the big picture, but I think it's great for people coming out of school.
I have a question. You talked that you pitch a lot of your own story ideas. That's one thing we notice a lot of students struggle with when they get into their first couple of writing classes. What do you look for specifically in a story, and especially a visual story, from the visual aspect of it?
Yeah, so I think the most important thing I'm looking for is that something is happening now. And, I say the most important thing is there's a strong character, and the second thing is something's happening now. Too often, I think video pitches it's like, this is a really interesting person and thing, but it all happened before, and there's nothing to shoot. People don't realize that going into it because they're not really mapping out what their story will be. So I try to think, like, what are the visual possibilities? Is this emotional at all? Because a lot of the stories that I deal with, they need some kind of emotional element, whether that's happiness, excitement, sadness, struggle, whatever. It's got to be something that people can feel. And I'm just looking around for interesting people, or if there's something in the news, some sort of social issue that's come up. I try to think about, okay, what could I do on a video perspective about that? And I just try to drill down from there and like, okay, well, is there an area I can go to where this sort of thing is happening? I think we did a big project, I think a year or 2 ago, about food stamps. And how there's just this big problem with funding and food stamps, and found some data that people actually in South Texas were having a hard time with this, and then figured out there are these colonias, which I had never heard of before, and called a guy who's done a lot of research at a university for these colonias, and works with the population and runs a nonprofit, and he helped me identify a character. And so I had no idea who that character would be going into it. I had no idea when I flew there and arrived who that character would be, but I had made that contact, and I knew that he was going to help me and take me to some events, and luckily was able to identify someone pretty quickly. But often it's this taking this big idea and figuring it out from there. Sometimes it's as simple as just being curious about your own community. I did this project about men in wheelchairs who were there because of gun violence. They're paraplegics. And that was simply because I saw that there were lots of young men in my neighborhood riding around in wheelchairs, and I had to ask myself, why is this happening? These people just can't all be sick. And then figured out that there's a program at the local hospital, a support group for guys like this, young African American men who have been paralyzed because of gun violence, and did a story based on that. So a lot of it's just simple curiosity too.
I know we all kind of have rough days where we're just not feeling it. Maybe we're having a little bit of writer's block. What do you do when you go through or have days like that? Is there anything you do to find inspiration or something else that increases productivity?
Yeah, I definitely have those days. I try to look for work that inspires me. That's one thing that I do. I think leaving the office and just kind of being out and about for a little bit, maybe taking a camera, maybe not. Sometimes I get stuck where I'm just sitting at my desk in front of my computer, and I'm like, why is nothing happening? And like, nothing is happening because you're just sitting there and not moving around. So getting out, I think going to events, seeing speakers, seeing other people's work, going to networking things, that's when I sort of step back and I'm like, oh yeah, I can do this really cool thing too. I forgot, but I can. That's typically how I do it. Or just getting an editor to kick in the ass a little bit. You're like, you need to finish this thing, or you need to do something else.
I've heard a few speakers in our past speaker series talk about the role of creativity and just trying to maintain that, and kind of jumping off that is like, you can't force creativity, sometimes. So I guess, are there things that you do to kind of keep things creative or bounce ideas off people and stuff like that?
Yeah, I definitely try to, like in the last class, I showed this piece about a day in the life of the Metro. And I was assigned to go shoot our subway system because people were complaining about it. And so I did it the traditional way at first, where I interviewed all these people, and they said, oh, of course, the Metro sucks, I hate it. And I knew that they would say that. That's not surprising. That's what every single news video about this topic says. So I decided, I'm going to cut all those interviews and put this to music. And that's when I got kind of really excited and was like, oh, I can do something really cool with this. And I just started editing really quickly, and it all came together so much faster than like the 5 hours before when I had been trying to cut these interviews. So I think sort of stepping out of the box sometimes and saying, oh yeah, I don't have to do this exactly in this formulaic way that I normally do it in. That's okay. So that definitely helps. And then yeah, just like continuing to look at other people's work always helps with that.
Yeah, we're going to play a piece. I think, Whitney, this is the. Why don't you talk about this piece that you did?
Yeah, so this is the AIDS piece I was talking about before, about the hospice. I think it's, we're dealing with a central character here, so we follow her kind of through a journey, and yeah, talk about it after.
Okay.
something that I was going to die. So, and at Joseph's house can help me learn how to take medication and take care of myself so I can live longer. So I decided to come. Just tired. Just tired.
She has so many physical challenges and ailments, including HIV disease.
Miserable, miserable, miserable.
All of them are hard to manage. Michelle was referred to Joseph's house through the HIV clinic that she goes to because her living situation was chaotic and she was chaotic within it, and she wasn't able to manage her meds, and so she was really sick.
It is Labor Day and we have labored hard in the kitchen and there's a big breakfast waiting for you. Please come join us.
Joseph's House mission is to welcome men and women who are homeless and dying of end-stage AIDS and sometimes cancer to live here the last months of their lives and receive really good medical and nursing care within a context of deep welcome, you know, a place to belong.
I was trying to get her ready when I was real sick. I was trying to get her prepared for it. But of course I bounced back thanks to Joseph's house. I didn't think I was going to make it. Didn't I look terrible? I don't know no place you can go and have somebody wash your clothes, make your bed, feed you, make sure you get your medication. It's my pills.
This is your pill box just till we give you the bubble pack.
Okay.
Okay, so you've already had your morning pills.
And the people are just so caring.
Let me just look at you.
And I call Patty the Healing Hands because every time I get stressed out because I got anxiety attacks, she talks to me about my forehead and it brings me back into zone. So I call her the Healing Hands. But people help other people, not just yourself. But
one woman got well enough to move out in the time that Lachelle has been here. And several people have died since she's been here. So she's been present to all of it, you know? And I think that helps her kind of get her bearings within herself.
Sleep in the daytime, because I'm up at night watching over her. There's nothing I can do for her, but I still watch over her.
One of my greatest memories, I guess, is actually of Michelle and Levada. And Michelle staying with her and comforting her and having her arms around her as she died, crying and reading to her, and then actually helping to bathe Levada's body.
I didn't want to be her friend. I didn't want to be anybody's friend because I was sick of death. So I said, come here. I'm not going to be friends with nobody. I'm going to speak, be nice, but I'm not going to be friends. But Levada wouldn't let it happen. If you'd seen us together, you thought we was friends for a long, long time. I thought we just met each other. It was really hard. It's not hard because she's gone. It was hard because I'm gonna miss my friend.
And sometimes it's a place where with all of that kind of support, a person not only heals within, but physically heals as well.
Need somebody to lean on.
And then they can go back to their lives. They have another chance.
If you just call me, call
gonna miss you.
It's sort of, what do they call that? Bittersweet.
Bittersweet.
Yeah.
Leave my family.
I was hoping I would see.
And y'all are my family. Every last one of y'all.
I was hoping I'd see you.
Not to bring you down or anything.
You seem very emotional when you watch that. How do these kinds of stories affect you personally?
I think I'm a human being just like everybody else, and when you're present for this sort of thing, it can be hard to see for sure. You separate yourself to a certain extent as a journalist, and I'm certainly able to do that in the moment. You sort of hide behind the camera in a lot of ways. But that's some tough stuff, and we're only human. So I think if you don't feel something when you're present for something like that, and you get to know someone in that situation, then you're probably not doing it right, like as a person, not just a journalist. So I always say be a human being first, be a nice, good person to be around first, be the kind of person that you'd want to be around. And the rest will come.
And one of the things that we've started talking about initially was the technology. How do we use the different tools that we have available to us, and how do we tweet, and how do we get social media out there? How do we promote the stories? But really, it all comes down to what? It's
people. It's stories. We're here to show the world what's happening with our neighbors and in our society, and often those are very emotional experiences. It's humanity.
Yeah.
That was amazing work. That was amazing work, and some really wonderful visuals as well as characters. And when I teach video, we talk about character-driven narratives. It's a very difficult thing for students to get. It takes a lot of practice. You make it look very easy. But can you talk about your process for how you get the kinds of interviews that you get, how you get people to say what you need them to say, and how you scope out a scene to get all the kitty cat and the person cooking? And this is all stuff I'm assuming to some extent you plan and to some extent you let happen. So maybe take us through how you set up a scene and the things you think about while you're getting that.
Sure, yeah. I would say the first thing I do, I think I mentioned before, is I don't show up with a camera. I show up with nothing, and I introduce myself and tell people what I'm doing, but also just talk to them, just like you talk to anybody. And then when it's time to actually conduct the interview, one thing that I always tell people that I can't emphasize enough is that you need to listen to them. And that sounds super obvious, but often we're fidgeting with our gear, and we're sort of trying to think ahead to the next question, and we're not hearing what they're saying, and we're not following up. But even beyond following up, people can sense whether you're engaged with them or not. And I think when they know that you are, and that you actually care about what they have to say, then they're more likely to give you more. And you also have to give back. I'm there to do a job and to get information from people, but if I don't reveal anything about myself in the process, then they're less likely to continue to give to me. This is how relationships work, right? Like, if you go on a date and you ask the other person a bunch of questions and they don't say, "And what about you?" then you're probably not going to want to go out with that person again. Same thing with an interview. They're not going to want to talk to you more if there's not some sort of exchange going on. So I do that. I do multiple interviews sometimes if it's a bigger project, because you don't always get everything that you need, or you learn more about a person as you go along. And then based on the interview and based on where I think the story is going, I sort of decide what scenes I want to capture. And sometimes I don't know what's going to happen in a situation like this. It's I'm spending a lot of time with someone coming back on multiple occasions and just sort of documenting daily life. But sometimes I'm planning more and thinking, a lot of the trips I do especially, I can't come back multiple times, so I have to think about what scenes can I get, and I kind of storyboard that out with lists mostly, but just thinking about, okay, this is what I think the story is, and this is what I need to show as I have the subject explain that information. And that's pretty much how it works.
So that was a little bit more than a 5-minute piece. How long did you work on it? How much footage did you shoot, roughly?
I don't really remember. So that was, I think I probably did that in 08 or 09, so it's been a little while. But I probably worked on that for 2 or 3 months, I guess, and shot a lot of footage because I went a lot of times. You want to not overshoot, but in situations like this, you're waiting for moments to happen, so you kind of want to be rolling a fair amount too. The moments are what really make pieces like this work. So you have to be kind of ready or just rolling. So it was a lot.
And, we talked about analytics a second ago. I mean, I think people that do work like this want to assess their impact, and there are things beyond just clicks or page views. What would you think an impact of a piece like that was?
Yeah, I mean, I do remember after this whole project came out, so, it's hard to evaluate whether it was the video or the text story or what, but I think some funding changes actually came about on a city level because of this project. The city saw this and said, okay, maybe we are not funding this properly. Part of this was also about how there were corrupt organizations in DC taking HIV/AIDS funding and, going on vacation with it or whatever. Just really bad things happening. So I think that they shut down some of those organizations as a result. So that's sort of like the highest bar. You want some sort of real, tangible change to be implemented. But other things that happen are on a much smaller scale, like the food stamp story I was talking about with the woman in the colonia. I had several people write me and say, how can I send food? How can I send stuff to this person? And that's really cool to see that people are responding and wanting to do something about the situation.
Going back to talking about the time it takes you to do stuff generally, is there a certain part of the process that you feel takes a lot longer? Is shooting generally the longest part of the process?
The editing is by far the longest part. Yeah, shooting, I could shoot something over 2 days, and then it might take me 2 weeks to edit it. And part of that is about the time that you're given, too. Like if I had a deadline or a tighter deadline, then I might finish it more quickly. But the editing process is much more. You have to think about things a lot and kind of map them out and restructure them and show it to people and then make changes, and it's quite a process. Whereas the shooting, you do some pre-planning, but it's just you're documenting whatever's happening, and then you go home.
Speaking of time, what type of time constraints in terms of the length of your pieces do you face from the post?
So I think I have the best job in the world. I'm probably the luckiest journalist there is. And in part, it's because I'm the most senior person on the video staff at this point. But they don't really tell me anything about that. I think that's not the reality in most cases. I think most of the time we're talking about they would want like a 2 to 5 minute piece. And people are doing those maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks. Some newsrooms it's more, some it's less. But yeah, I'm kind of in a unique situation.
I have 2 questions. First, you said there's usually a text or sometimes a text version of the story that goes along with your video. And how correlated are the text version and the video version? Do you work together with the writer to, make sure that y'all are in line with each other, or do you kind of just do your own thing?
Yeah, so it depends on the story, very much so. The project that I just showed, I don't think she even wrote about this place, or if she did, it was just a little blurb in the story. So often I'm trying to tell a slightly different story, or maybe a really different story, but that is somehow connected, so that it's not redundant. But sometimes, you both just have the best story, and you don't want to tell a different story because they're just both really good stories, or it's one really good story. And so like the story about the two brothers killed in combat that I mentioned before, that one, the writer told a very similar story in the text version. And we decided that was okay because it was a really powerful story, and one that a lot of Americans could not necessarily identify with because they hadn't experienced that themselves, but certainly would be impacted by. And so we did do that, and I think the way that people responded to one version or the other was kind of interesting. Just at a newspaper, we don't necessarily expect what we do to be the video people, what we do to be the most prominent thing or the thing that gets the most feedback, and in that case, that video kind of did. So that was really cool to see that we could have maybe a little bit more impact than the writing could offer.
My other question was about when you use music in your pieces. Like in that last thing we watched, there was one little 15-second clip of music. Like, do you just kind of find songs that are appropriate and use them, or do you have a source where you can find things without?
So in that piece, I think I must have cut the shot of the stereo, but there was actually, that music was playing in the room during that event. But often I will get music from the internet depending on the topic. And I'm using premiumbeat.com or .org. And those songs cost about $40 a pop because you have to have royalties unless it's a really short snippet. Sound blocks, I think we have a subscription to that. There are lots of royalty-free sources you can Google. But be careful with music. I will say, it can be really great to kind of drive the story along, move it along, and it can enhance a mood that's already there. But you don't want to create a mood that doesn't exist, and you also don't want it to take away from the actual scenes that are happening. So much of what makes documentary, nonfiction, video storytelling great is that we get to experience moments that people are having, and that's outside of interviews. I mean, the interviews are important, but the moments that we get in the scenes, just letting that stuff breathe and letting the viewer experience that stuff, that's equally, if not more important. And when we use too much music and we cover that up, that diminishes that. So be careful with it.
I know you said earlier you're senior photojournalist, I guess would say at at Washington Post. Do you get 100% free reign, you would say, on what you can cover, or is there someone above you that's like, hey, you need to do this week, or how exactly does that go?
Everybody's got a boss. I have one too. Actually, I sort of have a boss right now. We have a director position that's open, needs to be filled. But yeah, I have an overseeing editor who I have to show my work to, and I get a lot of flexibility for sure, and I have a lot of room to pitch stories and to sort of make them what I want them to be. But ultimately, yeah, there's someone above me who is looking at it and saying, okay, great, or let's not do that project, let's do this instead. Or you really have to cover this news story tonight even though you hate covering the news, sorry. That does happen from time to time.
Okay, I know Cindy kind of touched on this question a little bit, but how do you get people to trust you when you're interviewing them? Because I know revealing stuff like that is really difficult. Is there something that you do? Do you talk to them before, or how do you get them to open up like that?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying before, I do talk to them before. I do pre-interview. And the listening thing, I think, is probably the most important out of all of it. I often say when I give these talks that I feel like a therapist sometimes when I conduct interviews, because you start to realize that it's kind of rare for people to have the opportunity to talk about their lives in a way where it's like a blank slate, and they can tell you whatever they want to tell you, and they can release all these really hard parts of their lives to you, and it's surprising, but a lot of people just don't have that in their lives. They don't necessarily have a confidant, and so I'll let people talk for a long time, even though I may know that I'll only use a very small percentage of that. And part of that is that I have the luxury of working on things for a long time, and I can make mental notes like, okay, from 36 minutes to an hour and 15, that just was not useless because they were talking about when their dog died or whatever. But that's okay, as long as I have the time, then I can give that to them. I think going into it and remembering that people are giving something of themselves to you, and you have that mentality, they can see that, and so they're going to appreciate it and give back.
For you, what was the most important story, or most important to you that you've done?
Most important to me, I guess maybe it was when I did the project about the guys with traumatic brain injury in the military. Mm-hmm. That was sort of not a new phenomenon, but certainly something that was newly recognized by the media and by the military. And we were just seeing that there were all these guys out in society who couldn't function properly, but you couldn't see anything wrong with them, and they were really struggling. And these were people who had sacrificed a lot for our country. So that was really hard to see, but I think really important for us to tell the world about. So yeah, that's definitely one of them. And we were able to profile several guys. It was a really cool multimedia experience too. Unfortunately, because we don't use Flash anymore, I can't show it to you. I can show you the intro video, but it was a really neat way to tell stories at the time too. With I worked really closely with the designer, and it was super interactive. So.
And that's actually kind of interesting that you talked about that a little bit, about the story parts of the story that kind of disappear. Technology changes, like Flash has gone away a little bit, and nobody's really using it anymore, and so the platform isn't supported. How does that affect online stories?
Well,
how do you combat that? How do you keep the story intact so that it doesn't go away?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've been bugging our design people to try to fix that so that they can put that particular project back on the web, and they're way too busy to deal with it. They're like, that was 6 years ago or however long. We don't care. I think I put some stuff on Vimeo, so that's personally how I kind of handle it. I make sure that I archive myself. But I don't really have a good answer for that otherwise, because it does change, and we lose this really valuable material, so we have to figure out ways to preserve it. So maybe one of you guys can come up with that, like how do we do a time machine for multimedia projects? It'd be cool.
I've got a question. When you're working with video, you kind of answered this in my last class, but I'd like to hear it kind of again too. Just, are you thinking about the digital first aspect of creating this video, that people are going to see it on mobile devices, and kind of thinking about their attention spans and how they might view it on a mobile device as opposed to a desktop? Are those kinds of things that you think about?
Yeah, absolutely. I think with this type of storytelling, we have to think carefully about grabbing the viewer right away. So like with that last video, seeing this woman struggle right away, the intention there is you're going to wonder what's wrong with her, what's the deal there. Doing that as a way to keep people in the story, because people are just clicking around so much that if you don't get them, then they're gone within 20 seconds, if that, maybe sooner. So yeah, we're thinking about that a lot. And then, story length. If I did a feature-length documentary, I have a lot more time to build up who the characters are and what the issue is, and maybe show you some scenes that you wouldn't necessarily stick around for with a web video. So yeah, for sure.
Have you worked on any multimedia projects that included, I know we talked about text and video before, but like really where the video's chunked into pieces and maybe there's a slideshow and a data-driven interactive of some sort? You clearly have to work on a team if you do things like that, so maybe talk about teamwork and collaboration for those types of projects.
Yeah, I've had to do a lot of that stuff. I haven't done quite as much in recent year or two, but I love doing that stuff, mostly because you're working with people who are really smart and good at things that you're not necessarily good at. You're able to work together. The project I mentioned about the two brothers killed in combat and their surviving brother, that was a 4-part series. So, and actually, if you're able to pull up WashingtonPost.com/WiseFamily,
WISE family.
Yeah. We'll see how it's broken into parts.
And you're using WordPress as a platform for that.
Yeah, so we're using WordPress for all of our enterprise stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
SE.
Wise. And you'll see on here there are photo galleries. So here you can watch the first part of the doc. Once you press play, a little nav shows up below the video. So you could go to the next part. You could watch the whole thing there if you want, or you can scroll through and find different parts of it. You can find the photos. I don't know if there are graphics within this one, but definitely dealing with a lot of graphics. I do a lot of stories where I work with a motion graphics designer, and we sort of figure out, okay, this part of the video, I have nothing to show, but I can tell maybe you have something you can do with graphics, so they'll come up with something for that. So really cool ways that we can all collaborate together. And if you keep scrolling through the page, you'll just see how there's just all this content here. So, and the photos will show up large on the page. We used to take people to different pages to see photo content or video content, and we're trying to keep them in that same space. We know now that people don't want a new tab.
Could you go back to that a little bit? Because you were talking about this today, and this is kind of an interesting technique that they used in this story for the audience to keep track of what's going on in the story, because there's so many moving parts in the story. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, all of these characters come up in the story at some point. I think Isabel, the little baby, may be the only one that is not actually in my video at some point. So it's easy to lose track. I mean, the photographer I was working with, still photographer, so sometimes I do both, but in this case, he did the stills, Ricky Cariotti. He would always say, now who is Tracy again? And we'd be like on our way to meet these people or have already met them. So we know that the viewers will probably be confused. So we decided to create a timeline. So we also did this in video format. Motion graphics guy took some of these images and sort of shows you this menu in between each section, showing, oh yeah, this is who this person was, and shows how they're connected. It was a good way to do it.
I mean, I think it's important to understand that this is a medium that supports all this stuff, so it's not just here's a video and here's some text. The sky's the limit in creativity for what you can do and how you present it and how you make it interactive for the user.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, the interactive stuff is just amazing. It's incredible what people are doing with that. Yep. And you know, we're having choose your own adventure video now, where like you can be watching a video and pull an audio slider, and you can hear the example that I've seen is it's a couple, and I think they're breaking up. They might be on a date. It's been a couple of years since I've seen it, but depending on where you move the audio slider, you can hear the guy's thoughts or the girl's thoughts, and if it's in the middle, you can kind of hear both on top of each other and all the ambient sound. And it's just kind of a neat experience that you get to play with. And you know, there are all kinds of things like this being created. It's really cool.
When you're working on projects like this, you know, snowfall's the verb now. What types of stories do you look for if you're going to put the whole snowfall effect on it?
You know, I think we're looking for anything that might have multiple parts or is relatively in depth. That, you know, we want to keep the viewer, the reader there for a while, so we want to offer them a lot of different ways to consume the story. Yeah, those are the main things, I guess.
Do you actively pitch stories knowing that do you have that idea in your head already, or do you wait for feedback from others?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely pitch projects. You know, I'm working on a story about this guy who's on death row now, and it's a really hard story because it's about this thing that happened 25 years ago, and Alabama law doesn't allow me to interview this guy in person. So the visuals are tough. Like, I have a lot of other good interviews, and I have some archival images, but there's not a lot I can shoot. So I'm pitching doing a little bit of an immersive sort of, like, you get some text and then you get some video, and you know, you have an autoplay experience where like both of these elements sort of rely on each other. You need the text and you need the video to understand the whole story, and it's a journey. We'll see if they let me do that, but yeah, we're definitely pitching stuff like that.
And how many people were on the team for this particular story?
If you scroll to the bottom, actually, it'll show you. There were a lot. So maybe not. Yeah, there we go. And there are probably other people involved too, like developers and that kind of thing. And then they don't list the story editors, like the overall overseeing editors, but those people play a big role as well. And my editor at the time, this was a really cool experience because it was such a big piece and I had so many hours of footage. I had like narrowed down the structure of the story and mostly the order, but I just had way too much. So he and I sat down together and like line by line, clip by clip, decided, okay, that's in, that's out, that's out, that's out. And most of the time I'm doing it all by myself, so it was really fun and collaborative to be able to sit with him and do that.
We have a question in the back there. Hold on. There you go.
Okay, I saw that you use Vimeo like to upload all your stuff. Is that what you say is like the best medium? Like if we're applying like for a job and we want to show them their work, is that what you would recommend is like the best?
Yeah. Vimeo is pretty good because you can create a channel for yourself and it just looks pretty slick and it's easily embeddable and you can do a lot of things with it. Yeah, Vimeo is great. I mean, I think ultimately just like making it easy for people to see your content is what matters most. So it could be YouTube too, it doesn't matter.
Vimeo is also ad-free, right?
Yeah.
One more question. So with everybody having these, I assume that the Washington Post and a lot of other organizations are kind of encouraging reporters and everybody to have a certain level of skill so that if they need to whip out their phone and shoot something where something is happening that they can. There's obviously a lot of potential for user-generated content and doing stuff with that. So what is your advice for students in here? You might not be thinking that video is your career, but we're in a visual world. So what kind of advice do you have for people who are probably going to have to be shooting pictures or shooting video and contributing to content in that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely super important, and we do use this content a lot. I think the main thing is don't shake the camera, because that's how a lot of the video I'm seeing from reporters.
No vertical video?
Yeah, no vertical video. You guys know what vertical video means? Yeah,
like what all the streaming services do, the Meerkat and the Periscopic, yeah.
Right, yeah, we want our, you see that a video player is horizontal. You want to shoot your video horizontal. Yeah, hold it like this guy's holding it. Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, you just in those cases, you're probably just capturing whatever's happening in the moment. That's what we're using this stuff for. It's not so much like editing together a piece. It's usually no editing for these folks. So yeah, just hold it on the scene, and then maybe get some tight shots of the same thing, and maybe go over here. But it's mostly setting up a shot, and hopefully there's somewhat of a clean background. But most importantly, you're getting the action, and you're not moving for a while. You don't want your eyes don't work like this. Like I'm looking at you, and then I'm going to look at you. But I'm not. My brain doesn't process the scan, so don't move the camera that way. Don't zoom in. Your eyes don't work that way.
So obviously when you're traveling for work, it's generally all work-related stuff you're doing, but do you get a little downtime to check out the places you go?
Yeah, I mean, some, not a ton, but sometimes. I mean, I travel a lot for fun, too, so that helps. And I don't work all the time. Like, people talk about journalists working all the time, and some do. And that's just crazy, I think. I need my personal life. Like, I need to be able to, I rock climb and kayak, and I like to be outside, and that's really important to me. And I'm going to take the time to do that. So, but yeah, I mean, I may get to do like a quick run around the city and just check out something, or go to a museum if there's an extra hour.
With technology changing as fast as it does, do you have any like go-to resources to just kind of keep up on things, like any YouTube, of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Tutorials and
No, totally. I'm like, how do I do this
Yeah.
thing? And I
it's
watch
kind
a
of
video.
very teach yourself, continual learning all the time. You're talking about conferences and going here and all kinds of places. So besides YouTube, is that kind of the...
Yeah, it's mostly YouTube. I mean, continuing education classes can be good depending on like if there's something really specific that you want to learn about. Yeah, conferences. I'm an adjunct, so I learn a lot from my students. Yeah.
What should they leave when they leave here? What kind of skill set or what kind of tools should they leave with? Obviously, things change quickly, but what are the basic things that they need to have before they leave here?
If they want to do what?
And if they want to work in media?
Well, so working in media that's pretty broad. I mean, there are
let's keep it specific to journalism then.
Yeah, so, I think first you have to know how to be a really good journalist. That's going to be more important than most of the time than whether you can use some fancy tool. Do you know how to report, or do you know what a good story is? Can you find good stories? Do you understand the ethics of all of it? And then, having a diverse skill set is important. Know about coding a little bit, know about photography, know about writing, but specialize in something. I think you may hear different things from different people, but I think you need to be really good at something and have a pretty good idea about other things. So kind of pick what that thing is and focus on that. I was lucky that my photography skills transferred to video, and I was able to make that shift. But it was very much because I had a really strong foundation in the photojournalism program that I went through. I took a lot of classes in that, and I did a lot of work, and I worked for the student newspaper doing that type of thing. So, yeah, get a diverse skill set, but be really good at something.
All right, if we have probably time for one last question. If not, we good? Okay, so let's thank Whitney and David. Really quickly, undergrads, make sure you sign in before you leave.
I would just like to say one more thing. Thanks to Whitney for coming here today. We really appreciate it. Thanks to the National Press Photographers Association and the School of Journalism, which sponsored Whitney to be here this week, along with the other great faculty that we have this week. And take advantage of these opportunities. Tell your friends they need to be here. This room should be packed, and we really want it packed, and they should be, because this is fantastic information that we're getting. And we just really appreciate you being here, Whitney. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
And also, really quickly, thanks to David, who puts this on every year, so he deserves a pat on the back as well.
Thank you.
Make sure you sign in over here, and thanks again to Whitney.